load versus capacity model, we look at a person's total load and what any individual's capacity is going to be. Most of the time, we don't really know where our capacity really is. We could constantly stay under it so that an injury or a flare-up never occurs, but most people just with their day-to-day lives are going to experience some type of pain or injury just going about their lives. And if you're an athlete or you're a fitness enthusiast, that could come during exercise. For someone who isn't into exercising regularly, that might come as you're walking up the stairs and you're feeling your knee get tired as you get to the top of the stairs. If there's 1 or 3 steps, 1, 2, or 3 steps, you're fine. But once it gets past 10 steps or 15 steps, you lose your breath and you can't quite make it to the top. This is an instance of load versus capacity, meaning those 3 steps, you were fine going up. There was no pain, there was no flare-up, there was no setback. But once you go to take to the 10th, 12th, 15th step on a staircase, then pain starts to happen, inflammation starts to happen, and some kind of setback or injury happens. Now, this can also happen much further down the line. It might take much more than a set of stairs to get some kind of setback or physical reaction. It might be during a race or running a 5K, or it might be during a football game, or it might be when you're picking your kids up off the floor. It might be when you're doing yard work or shoveling snow. But somewhere along the line, we run into a point where we start to experience pain in our bodies because of the things that we do and because our load starts to exceed our capacity. So every day we start with a baseline capacity, meaning we wake up every single day with a pre-existing load. So that baseline capacity is our pre-existing load. It consists of our stress, diet, and sleep, our anatomical defects or dysfunction, and our functional diagnosis. So every single day we start with that baseline capacity, and we start to build on that as soon as we get out of bed. So each of those items takes up a box. So if we imagine on a chart, you have your baseline, and each of these items takes up so much space. So we wake up, we have our pre-existing load. Our pre-existing load consists of our anatomical dysfunction or anatomical defect, our stress, diet, and sleep, and our functional diagnosis. Each of those takes up so much space in our total capacity, and that's just what we start our day with. Anatomical dysfunction or defect could come from birth. It could be some type of the size of your bones, the relationship of your femur to your hip, the length of your legs. These are types of things that can't be changed. It could also be an injury that occurred during a car accident and a surgery. These are parts of your structure, your physiology that aren't going to change. And outside of surgery, exercise will probably have little impact on them. There might be some progress, but it would probably be minimal. So this is one of those areas that we have very little impact over. And it's the first thing we need to look at and know, like, where do they exist before we start to prescribe exercise that's going to help to decrease the load of each of these boxes. So the anatomical defect box stays pretty fixed. Now, stress, diet, and sleep we can have a massive effect on. Sleep, it's obviously a hard thing to do. We need to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep. Optimal is 8. Anything above 7 is pretty good, but we really want 8 hours of sleep. During our sleep, that's when all of our recovery processes happen. And if we don't sleep adequately and regularly sleeping adequately, not like one night of the week, we start to see this box take up more space. So when we start to sleep better, we start to get better quality sleep, we start to get a better length of sleep, we start to see a decrease in the size or the impact of this box on our total load. Diet, if you eat salty and sugary and fatty foods and you don't get adequate protein and you don't have a really good if you don't have a really good balanced nutrient profile in your diet, this box starts to take up more. So when we start to eat bad food, we start to gain weight. our pre-existing load increases just by the bad food that we're eating. We're now putting more stress on our body. When we start to eat natural foods that are giving us nutrients, we start to decrease the load on our body because we start to increase the nutrients we're getting and improving our recovery from our day-to-day stresses and from our exercise if that's something that we are partaking in. Our stress is one of those things that we have a major impact over if we work on stress management. So stress management is a skill that needs to be cultivated. We can do very little to impact the amount of stress on our minds and our bodies. Throughout the day, we have work, we have kids, we have relationships, we have school, we have whatever responsibilities you have. These are all stressors on us. And everyone copes with stress differently. And for people who cope with stress inefficiently, that is going to increase the effect of this on our total load, therefore bringing us closer to our total capacity. And when load exceeds capacity, that's when injury or setback happens. We start each day with this pre-existing load, with this baseline capacity, and then we start to build on it. We leave our house, we go to work, we have our early morning commute, we go and we deal with meetings or whatever type of manual labor we do. And all of these things are stacking up on our total load. We get through the day. Some of us go home to play with our kids. Some of us go to the gym to exercise, and we start to do the things that we need to do around the house. And then suddenly the lower back tightens up, the knee starts to cramp. And this could be from doing exercises like push-ups and pull-ups and kettlebell swings. And on the kettlebell swings, your lower back just starts screaming and you're like, oh, it must be the kettlebell swings. But we don't consider all of the things that come before we even got to the gym. This total load now exceeded the capacity and an injury occurred. Now, that also includes all the stuff that led up to that day. How much exercise were you getting? How much sleep? All those things contribute to total load. When load exceeds capacity, injuries or setbacks occur. So you have your total capacity, and anything below the daily capacity, we have this line here. Anything above that, we have no problems. We're staying within our capacity. We're managing our stress well. We're not putting too much on ourselves, and we're keeping our total load underneath that baseline capacity or under that daily capacity. When we exceed our daily capacity, that's when we start to experience pain, setback, dysfunction, and that's when our bodies start to talk to us with inflammation, with whatever kind of pain you're experiencing. It could be inflammation, it could be burning, it could be shooting pains, it could be throbbing or radiating pain, it could be a jolting pain. Pain is different for everybody, and it happens differently in each part of your body. So in order for us to start to improve our body's ability to manage total load, we need to then start to implement our corrective action plans. So how do we correct this? If we can only influence parts of our total load, what parts can we influence? Like we said, we can't really do much about all of our daily activities, all of our responsibilities throughout the day. You're gonna have to go to work. You're gonna have to chase the kids. You're gonna have to do some yard work. You're gonna have to do whatever activities you do. So the things that we can now influence are our pre-existing load. So when we start to talk about our functional diagnosis, this is what we talk about with ranges of motion in your joints and the relationship of each side of your body to the other side. So is your right side stronger than your left side? Do you have more range of motion in your right shoulder versus your left shoulder? All of those things start to contribute to how you move. So if how you move in the world is inefficient, you're going to put more stress on the joints than they can manage. So we start to exceed our capacity even quicker. So when you start to have better range of motion and better strength balance from side to side, from top to bottom, right leg versus left leg, front versus back, we start to move better in the world, and this now puts less stress on the joints, which will decrease the load on the total load of the functional diagnosis on our total load. So the things that we can influence within the functional diagnosis are ranges of motion. We can improve range of motion in the ankles, the knees, the hips, the shoulders, the mid-back, the neck, in order to create better and more efficient positions to stand in, to sit in, to walk in, to run in. When we move better, our body has less stress on the joints and we're able to feel better. We have less pain, we have better performance, we're able to do more around our house, around the workplace, in our free time, in our leisure time. We're able to do things that we weren't able to do when you weren't working on your flexibility, when you weren't balancing your strength from one side to the other and from your upper body to your lower body. You're now able to go out on longer hikes and go out dancing without worrying about, is my ankle gonna bother me in the morning? Is my knee gonna bother me in the morning? So this is something that we have a lot of influence over with exercise and with lifestyle. If we start to incorporate little exercises into our daily routine just to improve our ranges of motion in whatever we need to, ankles, knees, hips, elbows, shoulders, wherever those ranges of motions need to improve, because the pain that we're experiencing in our shoulder might not necessarily be completely influenced by the shoulder. It may be because our hips don't move well and our shoulders are compensating anytime we have to put something away overhead, or we're swinging a hammer at work, or we're picking up our kids and we're holding them in one hand. Whatever the things are that we do the most influence our bodies. Our body will adapt to the demands that you place upon it. So in order for us to raise our capacity or to lower the pre-existing load of that functional diagnosis, we need to do some corrective action exercises to influence the impact of that diagnosis. As we decrease the impact of that functional diagnosis, we stay further away from exceeding our capacity. We talked earlier about stress, diet, and sleep, and this is one of our biggest things that we have influence over. Stress management is probably one of the most underutilized activities or time, whatever, that is over. It's unfair that it's not talked about more widely in the medical community, on the news, whatever, like big media outlets are out there that have a big influence on individuals. It's a shame that it's not spoken about more. The power of breath work, the power of doing some meditation or some flexibility and some mindfulness training. And none of this stuff needs to have any sort of spiritual connotation. It can be a very physical practice. So when we start to incorporate breath work, we start to incorporate better breathing mechanics in our day-to-day and in our relaxation efforts, we start to see an improvement in the way that our body is functioning as we take ourselves out of a sympathetic nervous system state and we start to shift into a parasympathetic nervous system state. So we go from being in fight or flight to rest and digest when we start to incorporate better stress management techniques, which also includes sleep. If we're getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep, it's going to help our body to downregulate and start to recover mentally and physically. So sleep is going to have a major impact on our pre-existing load of our sleep, diet, and stress. Diet, when we eat processed foods, when we eat salty, sugary, and fatty foods, that stuff has a negative effect on your body. Your body is going to prioritize dealing with these technically foreign substances, because most of our convenience-based foods are made with lots of chemicals for preservatives. So when we start to eat more organic or even just fresher foods that have a shelf life of no longer than a week or two from farm to table, that's when we start to see a major improvement. Your body starts to utilize the food that you're putting into it for nutrients and to recover from the things from the demands that you're placing on it, rather than trying to process out some chemicals that are being added to food to keep them on the shelves longer. So we can have a big influence on our stress, diet, and sleep. So when we do start to influence those two boxes, we see a decrease in the load that our pre-existing, that our daily baseline starts with. So we start the day with our daily baseline capacity, lower than before we started to worry about our sleep, diet, and stress, before we started to worry about our functional diagnosis, our ranges of motion, and how our body moves. And then as coaches, what our job is to now raise your total capacity. as we start to raise your daily capacity by being able to get more done over time, by choosing exercises that are going to make you stronger for the activities that you partake in, as we start to incorporate more cardiorespiratory endurance so that you can get to the top of the stairs without losing your breath, so that you can play with your kids for more than 5 or 10 minutes before you have to sit down and take a break. These are the types of things that coaches in the fitness industry are able to do, that people don't realize that this is what coaching is really about. What are the impacts or what are the lifestyle choices that we can make that are going to most impact our health? And this is also how we avoid injury. This is also how we avoid setback and how we approach injury when they do occur. We're able to look at how did we exceed that capacity? What was the thing that put it over? And it's not the last thing, it's the volume of things that lead up to that last thing. So if we look at the kettlebell swing example, we had all of our total load, all of our baseline load, plus some daily activities, and then we had push-ups, squats, and kettlebell swings, and ouch. So we stop and we say, okay, well, it must have been the kettlebell swings. And you go to the doctor and they say, well, it must have been the kettlebell swings. So then you go back to the gym, you avoid the kettlebell swings, and then all of a sudden the same thing starts happening on other similar movement patterns. So in order to figure that stuff out, we start to look at the functional diagnosis. It's the movement screening. Where are the ranges of motion that we need to improve? And what are the strengths, the balance that needs to be balanced? What are the strength aspects that need to be balanced? When we talk about load versus capacity, what we're looking at is what does any single individual have to do throughout the day that's going to contribute to their total load, and how do we increase their capacity before that load is exceeded, before that capacity is exceeded by their load and an injury or a setback occurs.